direction. I think it's better than nothing. I do. It's not where we need to be, and I have reservations about you presenting it to the City Council in this form.
Thank you.
I just want to respond. I mean, I agree with what Commissioner McKinnon was, what he said. I think we may be speaking to the wrong person here, though. I am sure that you put all that you thought needed to be done, but the constraints that you're working under are budgetary constraints and city manager's office. So I don't blame you for this. You just kept saying you. I mean, maybe the royal. Okay, I got you. But happy with the.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, I'll just point out that and tonight we are commenting on this plan to City Council, so we can make the statements, you know, in the form of a motion that we want to express to City Council. So I mean, if this is appropriate and if the chair agrees, I'll go ahead and move that we recommend that City Council adopt this plan and recognize the ways in which it falls short, and you know, we can craft a message here where we are directing their attention to the plan's weaknesses. To me, and I realize why this is the case. This falls short in its inability to crack the code with how to address the demand or the latent demand for EV charging in the residential neighborhoods. And that's because it is a difficult challenge that all communities that are calls for. That a commission in order to tackle that challenge really seems like it is a or political will to engage and is enhanced. And approval. The key thing is that we want to add steps to this plan that expedite its implementation and expansion.
May I ask you a question about your motion? Why would you recommend that the council adopt a document that you recognize the shortfalls in? Wouldn't you ask them to make these demands of the document before they adopt it?
No, I'm seeking to make that a part of the motion, and it sounds like commissioners have ideas for how the plan should be adjusted. I'm making it one suggestion that it include the establishment of
a commission,
a commission or a task force, or other steps that will move things forward at a faster pace.
Too. I mean, if I'm not sure that I feel qualified to actually change the goals in this plan. I mean, I'm not an expert in EV usage or charges or what have you. I would rather have staff come back with a more ambitious layout than they have.
I think if it's helpful, so for the purpose of the EV action plan is moving forward, you know, eventually to council. The purpose tonight is to really get the commission's feedback. We've put on here the option for the commission to recommend to council. And I think as kind of just to frame, you know, where this is, it's, you know, I think on the first page of the plan, there's a mobility framework that sort of has an upside down triangle. And I think it's important to sort of think of it in that manner. This is not the be all end all only, you know, possible silver bullet that we have to address, you know, the GHG emissions. You know, for sure, 64% of our citywide GHG emissions come from transportation. You look at the mobility pyramid, the city has poured the vast majority of its resources into walking, biking, transit. EV falls into sort of, you know, the bottom of that pyramid. Not to say that it's not important, you know, but the way that resources are allocated and what have you, you know, have been put towards obviously a lot of, you know, you've seen the bike action plan, the pet action plan, you know, but I think I just wanted to put that note in just to sort of frame, you know, where this overall mobility strategic goal. But again, I think what Commissioner Perry is suggesting, you know, appears to make sense is that I think what I'm hearing from the Commission is that it's not sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't want an EV action plan at all, but I think it's appropriate for the commission to think about, ways that you feel that it could improve. And, it really is that recommendation to council, and here's the way we think that, things could change
that
to make
makes
this
sense.
plan better.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Okay.
I have an amendment. If we
Jennifer was waiting for a turn.
While the other commissioners were speaking, I was thinking about, things to say to council such as, we recognize that this plan is moving forward and coming to you, but that we don't necessarily recommend it specifically as is. The three comments that I want to make based on what I've heard this evening is that this plan, I think we need to send a message to the council that the idea of removing the existing stations in order to retrofit them or replace them to have better measuring is not necessarily the right way to go, at least from the three speakers that we heard here this evening. I think we need to tell council that the concept of taking these stations, removing the service coverage, using these stations is a bad idea. It's a laudable goal to say we want to have improved measuring of usage, but there could be a lot of negative publicity for the city that could amplify out into the community as a result of removing the coverage that the city might not even be able to recover from. Negative publicity has a way of sticking in people's minds. And so if some stations are removed while they're being retrofitted or replaced, and then all of a sudden people can't use the stations that they were already using, that would be something that the city might not recover from. So I would look at that carefully. And I also think the clustering of stations in very dense neighborhoods is a really good idea. So I would say, to the extent that this plan doesn't already do that, we should tell council that that would be a really huge improvement, and to better define targets to improve measuring and goals. Because again, without without those targets, it kind of becomes you don't know what you're chasing, you don't know what you're going after. So for me, I would say, I recognize that this plan is going to go to council, but until this plan is strengthened in those three ways, for me, it's not a perfect plan.
Thank you. Amy?
I think this plan is it's kind of unique for the kind of document that we look at. I think because a substantial part of this plan is really kind of about infrastructure investment and spending dollars. So for me, it's actually a little challenging to make some of these recommendations, because I feel like in some ways they're budget decisions, and they're decisions about the city's priorities and how the city wants to spend its dollars. I would say, for me, Jing kind of raised the walking, the biking, the expand.
71, which would seem to be kind of a good, a lot of the problems we're having in distribution talking about.
Well, I share both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and plus take cars off of the street. So what I'm hearing from the smaller car companies that are committed to going 100%, hybrid or electric in the very near future, and so yeah. So, and then there are the big guys that are making have made significant investments, and I just don't. It would be it seems like it would be a very big missed opportunity if we weren't there to meet the market where it's going to be in a few years. So I think that all ties into
basically recommending adoption and shortfalls, instead of just saying that we recognize shortfalls, say, and to consider and incorporate the many valid suggestions that came up in the record from this hearing, which I have very good confidence will be brought up again at their hearing. You know, I just circled a bunch of points, and there weren't that many that interests you all. As a summary, thing that came up was that renters who are under rent control can't install their own chargers the way renters who are not under renter control can. That the experts in the community say that 1,000 chargers is what we need in 5 years and not what this plan proposes. They also pointed out there may be a possible funding source that's not in the plan that has to do with taxes paid by auto dealers. There's controversy and discussion about whether it's appropriate to upgrade the dumb chargers first or do it as when new chargers are installed and trade them out, or how that happens, but slowing things down with worrying about that creates concern. There was a discussion about groups of chargers, about the number of fast chargers was not maybe sufficient in the city, that buses should be given more accelerated attention, that commission or task force that can, in addition to what's in this plan, continue to explore new ways to crack the code, as Jason said, would be very helpful. We would need, there was concern about the lack of quantitative goals. That's everything I heard, and I think that would kind of lay out exactly what we mean by shortfalls, and they can address that with their staff, since this isn't, as Amy pointed out,
What form would that go
our
in your motion?
wheelhouse.
yeah, that's friendly.
So is that work for you? So it's a more detailed way of saying that we don't know what you should do, you should figure it out, and
So
here's.
there is a reason you take copious notes.
There are always reasons. They come in handy over and over again.
Really the spirit of my motion is so that this isn't what's laid out tonight is an important step forward, and there's strong interest and strong reason in expediting the implementation of the plan and coming up with new solutions. And if council decides that an EV task force is the way to go, that task force can be a part of identifying ways of achieving those things. So the things you just listed there, the challenges that we're facing, laying out a process for making it happen, it is what I'm after.
Right. So, so that approach, does that work for us?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have another thing to say?
What happened this evening? Okay, we're on. What happened this evening was that we got a report based on the community feedback and other meetings, and we're really saying both to the council and to your office, it doesn't go far enough and it doesn't go fast enough. And ultimately, to fix pollution and emissions, the key thing is to get people out of cars, but those who do drive to flip over to EVs. It's not a one and done, it's a two-step operation. But we want both of these to happen incredibly quickly. And whatever happens between now and when it gets to council, it needs to incorporate the things we're talking about and needs to make a significantly stronger recommendation. That would be our message to you as a result of this evening.
let's vote.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi?
Yes.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Yes.
Commissioner Lambert?
Yes.
Commissioner McKinnon?
Yes.
Commissioner Perry?
Yes.
Chair Fresco?
Yes. Everybody.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Need a 5-minute break, but it has to be very quick because we have
Did we
two
need
big
to-
things to discuss. It's 8:49, so I expect you all back here at 8:53.
Can I just tell you something? Speaking to the damn mic.
So 10:30, what time do we have to be at? So, stop. Hello? I'm just trying to set a timer.
Oh, okay.
What time should it be?
Let me ask you a question. We were given a graph
It's almost 9.
that compared
So should we give that?
hybrid sales to EV sales to plug-in hybrids. 3 charts. Meaning if you, well, I'll show you what the graph is. This is everywhere. You can't. Right. Well, this graph suggested something else. Look at this graph and tell me what you see here.
This is hellaciously tight quarters.
This is not optimum. This is not optimum at all.
I told Nina we should shoot for like hour and 10 minutes for the first one, and an hour for the second one, but if it looks like the first one's gonna go long, we're gonna have to continue.
I think so. I mean, we only got 2 hours. Not even 2 hours. I mean, if we're supposed
Leaving at 11.
Great.
But you better be back here in like 2 more minutes if you're leaving the room.
I mean, really, we don't have less than 2 hours. Yeah, I need to buy this.
I like that she started doing it. That's good. I like this from.
I like that thing.
I was young time, like, I was closing out a bar or something, but it'll be better next time at the East Wing.
On 18th. Yeah.
We don't have to be out by 11. I mean, it'd be nice if we were out by 11.
How long?
Okay. I'll try my best, you know, I sometimes, I told somebody to shut up once. You know, I don't like to cut people off. Okay. I do like to let people be themselves. Okay, never mind then. I don't care. Well, I did also set an alarm for when it's time to wrap up. So, and it quacks like a duck. So, an intermediate, maybe I should set an earlier alarm and say that means we have 10 minutes and we gotta wrap up. I hate doing that because it's just a half an hour. You think it should be half an hour? I'm gonna do 30 minutes at a time, because we have 2 hours, right? So I'm gonna do a 30-minute alarm to let people know that we're 30 minutes, we're halfway through the first one, and then another 30 and like that. There's only 4. Did I lose them? Yes. No, I didn't lose them. No.
No. Two separate actions, so we have to have them separate.
think it would drag it out, and it would get me really confused. And I have 2 sets of notes. I couldn't possibly do that. So, Jane, it has come to my attention during my research of the downtown plan that my sidewalk vote.
I gave you the first round. The table, the parking table?
Never made it into the went to council and is not an appointment.
You're now officially a planning
I do
commissioner.
not see it in there. Yes. It's not, well, maybe the map wasn't updated.
Do I get carte blanche?
Actually, taken together, they're consistent.
Okay. Because I would cry. I looked at the errata, I didn't see it on the errata sheet that went to council. Because, you know, I would be deeply demoralized. I have my own wits.
Okay. Actually, the DCP calls for 25% of the number of market rate units to be affordable. Taken together, the 100 units plus the 64, that would come out to 41 units.
Okay, everybody, let's pull this act together.
I mean, what you could do, instead of allocating 60, you could say, okay, we'll give you 60. So really, it's really taken together. Yeah. So really, it does. Yeah. So it applies.
Where are my commissioners? Richard, did you see the others out there?
Yes, Anderson has just gone to the bathroom. I know.
To be honest, I think
And she was the one who said, and where's Leslie?
that would have been part of the discussion. Where is she?
All right, let's start, and Leslie will come back in a minute, I'm sure. So our next item is item 7B, which is a DR hearing for 13256 6th Street. DA, sorry, so sorry. Do we have any, we don't need any disclosures on this. So we'll go right to the staff report. Mr. Foley.
Good evening, Commissioners. Paul, am I on?
Can I remind you to do your ex parte disclosures?
That's up, though. That's up. Okay. Hello?
Let's just do ex parte disclosures anyway, because we're so cautious. Jason?
Yeah, on this and the next item, I reached out to the applicant this afternoon with questions about the options for changing the parking program, and they gave me feedback on their constraints.
No context.
None.
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 Okay.
All right.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Paul Foley, Principal Planner. Tonight, we're going to be talking about first 1313 to 1325 6th Street, a development agreement. The site is on the east side of 6th Street, between Santa Monica and Arizona, in the neighborhood village district of the downtown community plan. The development site is 15,000 square feet and currently contains a surface parking lot, and the surrounding properties are also zoned in B.
I think we have to move, right?
The site is actually, as all of us know, probably next door, right over here. It is mid-block between Santa Monica and Arizona, adjacent to the library, as I said, to the south, and an office building to the north. And you can see, hopefully you can see in this slide, that the building at 1314 7th Street is located behind the subject site. It is a mixed-use development that's proposed of 46,124 square feet with 64 residential units, 4,860 square feet of ground floor commercial space, 1,697 square feet of outdoor dining area, a 4-level parking garage. There's 138 parking spaces, 100 long-term and 12 short-term bike spaces, and 28 EV charging stations. Per the DCP, as a Tier 2 project, the proposed development is subject to an administrative approval as it's under 75,000 square feet. The applicant has proposed, a development agreement due to the excess parking spaces provided on site that will serve to permanently replace existing parking spaces that are currently obligated to the owners of 1314 7th Street. The DA may modify development standards except for height and FAR. Here's the ground floor to show you. This is one of the most important floors, obviously. There are various setbacks along the frontage, but the building itself is 15 feet curb to building. As I said before, there's 4,860 square feet of commercial space, 1,697 square feet of outdoor dining area, 1,500 mailing room, packing, two-bedroom units, and vehicle access from 6th Street. As well, the roof deck contains 2,649 project, reduced in size. On April 20, comments included that the balconies and other building features, including the bike parking, should not have a space appearance. The 6th extend the materiality to the alley side, further activate the south elevation and remove expansive concrete walls, and reduce the visual impact of massing from the street. With respect to the unit livability comments, the livability of the interior units should be further considered for light and air, and we should reconsider the unit sizes because they appear small. With respect to the pedestrian orientation, the commercial space should share between at least 2 of the tenants, and bike storage, the residential bike storage, should be on the ground floor. Also, talking about community benefits, the Commission recommended that they have an intense TDM plan, achieve LEED Platinum certification, maximize the rooftop PV panels, explore rent stabilization for market rate units, increase the number of EV parking spaces, enhance fees based on the feasibility study, provide affordable units on the side with considerable on-site with considerable consideration given to the number of affordable units and levels of affordability towards meeting city goals, include 711 Colorado as part of the development agreement, provide and manage social services for the senior units at 711 Colorado, and also you had general comments about exploring ownership opportunities and increase the number of units should not sign and map. The ground floor incorporates glazing along the entire building for direct interaction. 7 feet gap that extends from podium to sky, the front property line, which equates to a total occupied with building. The floor area can be divided. Street parking. The project consists of 95 parking spaces, 70 and 43 parking spaces. 90 spaces are spaces which may be used for on-site spaces under the DCP. Reasonable to eliminate minimum parking, bicycle parking. The proposed and the DC maximum. You'll see here that the are 18. The DC is for 43 spaces that get parking spaces, which are included in for the 1325 at 30 and 4 6 at 30% are required by the DCP. Bedroom factor is 1 point. Impact fee 4,000. Enhanced park child care linkage fee. Park affordable housing commercial linkage fee are the maximum permitted. That was before. Here is a comparison between the Tier 1 fees and one with the 90% maximum of the difference between the two is some of them is significant, as you can see, and the TIF is less so. Cultural arts is less so. As noted here, the proposed project is exempt from the 5.5 of transportation and to the council. The project will provide 15 affordable housing units, transit and employment center within the downtown, and 10 three-bedroom families located in the NV district, which supports mixed will develop in with DCP goals and policies, and the project will provide transportation, parks, recreation, early childhood initiatives from uses, commercial uses will generate were received. However, we did receive letters of exempt on.
As we get a cue from our fast-talking staff member.
Yeah. I have a couple questions.
Okay, there's a couple questions here from Commissioner Lambert.
I want to be sure, am I on? I can't hear myself. I want to be sure I have this straight.
Staff, she's asking you a question.
The definition of affordable units at 711 Colorado is pursuant to the settlement agreement and the deed restriction, correct? We have no control over that whatsoever. And the fact that that does not correlate with the Affordable Housing Production Program is just the way it is, right? And it believes it does not correlate. So it actually, the median income rate developer chooses not to develop 711 Colorado, but does on-site, we could invoke the, and I think I read that in the development agreement, the Affordable Housing Production Program rents and income levels, correct? Or if the developer chose another site to do the off-site, the same would be the case. We could use AHPP incomes and rent levels, right?
It would obviously, as part of the development agreement, be negotiable.
I can't hear you.
It would be negotiable again at that point. So you wouldn't have the restriction necessarily of
You wouldn't have the deed restriction.
Right, of the settlement agreement.
Just out of curiosity, when was the settlement agreement signed?
2015, although there had been several agreements and implementing agreements and amendments, and so the last settlement agreement and when this deed restriction was recorded was in 2015. And just to be clear, it wasn't as if the city had come up with these revised rents. What it was is when the original, the Craig Jones deal went into effect, it was under the old system with these rents, and so basically we held status quo as to the rents.
So the original plan for this site used the old median income definition and the old rents. So that's why it was carried over into the settlement agreement? Is that the...
Well, the original market rate units that were the subject of the Craig Jones settlement, yes.
Okay, even though the AHPP was changed in 2013? Okay.
But it is correct, yeah, at the site, there was a sort of partially constructed project that had, that used those rents.
there's
We have
Andy.
Andy Agel here who can give you a lot more detail because he was involved in all the settlement negotiations.
That would be great. I've decided not to self-immolate, so I'll listen to you.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Andy Agel. I'm the city's Director of Housing and Economic Development. And let me see if I can shed a little bit of light on this, because this is almost 10 years of history in what this is coming before you.
5 minutes or less.
I'm sorry?
Just, I don't mean to rush you, but, you know, I'm feeling the pressure.
So let me see if I can narrow it down as much as
important.
possible. So this all relates to the JSM kingdom downtown falling apart.
Right.
We had market rate buildings, we had affordable buildings, half built, including this site, which had a shell there that started construction, abandoned it. We, city attorney's office developed a series of owners. They bought that the market rate properties would funnel money. The agreements, because our priority was we wanted the affordable housing to get built, and the said, hey, what about us? They filed a claim against the city. As part of that agreement with them, one of the elements of that was try to maintain what was in the deed as it was. So, for example, it was the old HPP. So, although we'd already changed them, it had the old HPP numbers. It was also a senior project. We did make some adjustments to try to get greater affordability and to have a better mix in terms of the unit sizes, particularly because it was senior housing. So that's why it's very peculiar. There's 2 sites that are subject to these deed restrictions, and the owners, as part of the settlement agreement, wanted to create sites that they could ultimately sell to housing developers who would see the value in receiver sites.
So the bottom line is it's a done deal. I mean, there's no way we can change the affordability stuff on that site.
It's in the deed, which
It's already
predates
recorded
the
deed
development.
restriction
I know.
against that property.
I have another question of staff. Is that okay?
Yeah.
There's one unit at 711 Colorado, I think one, for victims of elder abuse. Do I understand that correctly? Who pays the rent on that? Or nobody pays the rent on that?
Is it a preference? I think it, yeah.
The developer basically eats it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's,
The other question I have, another question I have is, what is the annual rent increase allowed? How do we calculate? It's not addressed in there.
isn't it just by the...
I mean, AHP goes up every year, but this is sort of a different animal, so I'm just curious.
So the HPP rents are typically governed by where
Right.
median income is, and we haven't seen a change in median income for several years now. So unless we see median incomes rising,
I gotcha.
that's what it's tied
So
to.
it would be governed by whatever AHPP increase
Exactly
is.
right, yes.
Okay, thanks. And then finally, in is 62, but in the development agreement, was that intentional? Because the deed restrictions, so it's 62.
Yeah.
Okay.
The deed restriction at 711 Colorado does say 62.
Who's going to monitor these? I assume it's the housing division.
Yeah, there.
That's kind of an important question.
One change we did make in the deed restriction is that at a certain point in time, we made all of the tenants come from the city's list.
Right.
So we ensure that they're income qualified and that there are also preferences.
Like a different process.
Yeah, well, but we've actually, you're absolutely right. We've had a hard time getting the moderate income people onto our list, so actually in the last month we've done income people.
At this level?
It goes up to that level because we've got the
You got the
weird,
old
we've got the old
pre-2013
and the
stuff.
new.
Okay.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Mario?
So generally within the HPP, when we had the JSM problems downtown, we changed all the regulations, and essentially you can't get a certificate of occupancy on your market rate until the affordable is done and basically occupied and ready to go. Because that was the problem we had almost 10 years ago, right? Right. There may be requirements through the process. I'll ask my colleagues if they know, but ultimately, if your market rate, you can't start generating money on that until you've got your affordable. That's right. That's correct. We've made the law very clear in this regard.
Yeah, it's written into the development agreement on this particular one on page 15 at the bottom. It's written in there that the C of O is not issued. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? Richard?
Commissioner Anderson has one.
Go ahead.
Is there some kind of is there some kind of I don't understand why the affordable units for the proposed projects are being provided off-site if that off-site location is deed restricted to affordable units. Right, that's deed restricted, that's what's going to get built there, it's deed restricted.
That was part of the settlement. It contemplated that it would be a receiver site for market rate projects.
So that is part of the
That's part of it.
Settlement
It was
agreement.
contemplated that
Not
way.
the deed restriction necessarily, the settlement agreement.
Correct.
Okay, great, that's super helpful. Can you help me to understand the fees, the proposed fees on this project? Are they more than or less than the Tier 2 defined fees from the DCP?
These are compliant with the Tier 2 defined fees in the DCP.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And the child care, hold on. The childhood initiatives contribution, that's the same as what the child care linkage fee would
That's
have been?
right.
What is shared housing? What is shared?
Basically,
public parking?
Right, exactly, like and that's been the approach that we've taken with sort of housing, or not housing, but parking that's provided within the core. If you recall, kind of when on the periphery, we seek sort of these like city spaces to sort of, have them brought within city control, potentially in the future. It's sort of at the city's option to create a pool of public parking on the periphery. Within the core, it's a little more flexible in the sense that, we still want it to be open to the public, but it doesn't necessarily have that option of being in the city's control, but it cannot be just reserved only for project users. It's effectively, open as public parking.
So Jing, I'm sorry, you're distinguishing on the other project about the ones that say that they're city spaces versus shared spaces.
Right, as a concept, like on other development agreements that have been adopted on Lincoln Boulevard, we've had that particular provision. And this is a distinction for projects that are sort of closer to the core of downtown that have parking. The approach has been to open up as many of those spaces for public use and accessibility as possible.
And they'll charge for that parking because it's all unbundled.
Right.
I gotta say, I'm so sorry. I feel like I'm being really thick here, but I don't understand the city part. I don't understand.
That's a separate thing. Yeah, that really has to do with the city having management control of the space, as opposed to and sort of adding it to the pool of our public parking. So that's in the structures, for example, already. It's kind of a way to sort of build a capacity for it, in some limited way on the periphery.
But now I'm confused. So then, how does it differ from the shared parking? Because I hear you saying the shared
difference
parking
really is in management and ownership, control.
To have all of those shared spaces be public city managed spaces, and this is what you concluded, or there's a reason to not
not
have
in this development agreement. In the one you will hear later, yes, that's the case, because that's the approach we've taken on projects on Lincoln Boulevard on the periphery. And in this one, the approach has been, there's the 20 shared spaces, so they're not exclusive to the project.
So what is the, I mean, 6 out of the core, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why, like,
Mm-hmm.
parking outside of the downtown core, what's the distinction between?
When we've talked about it, that concept in the DCP, I think when we said periphery, we've, I think, been consistent that Lincoln, really is the edge. It's sort of like that point where it's a little far, from what we would think as the rest of the downtown. So I think, we were just being consistent with how we've talked about peripheral parking versus the rest of the downtown area.
So is the general idea that the new parking that the city will manage going forward will only be on the outer edge? It will not be in between?
That's obvious. I mean, in addition to the 6,500 spaces in our structures that we have, there's just been this interest of how do we maximize and manage the limited resources that we have in the core. And, in terms of it's not only going to come through DAs, we're going to try and find other ways, but this has been, a sort of inroads to begin that capacity building on the periphery to develop that sort of same shared pool of parking, where the city, again, it's not that it's required, the DAs all have, it's really at our option, should we choose to include that as part of a future parking management program.
And is there a downside that you see to taking that public direct management approach closer to the downtown core, but still outside of the downtown core?
I think it has to do with really how we think about circulation and mobility within the downtown and how we manage that. And like I said, I think that we've always been consistent about thinking that if we are to try and manage the core and some of the congestion issues that we see, that this is perhaps one way that we might approach it, is that if we, again, I think something that's been talked about is, what if monthly parkers, for example, are relocated elsewhere, does that kind of help in terms of increasing capacity? And at 6th Street, it's sort of kind of in that middle area, so I think we had made a decision there, that that's not quite what we mean when we say that, building the capacity on the periphery.
Yeah, thank you.
Amy, do you want to finish?
I think I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Are we ready to hear from the applicant?
Oh, I still have my questions.
Oh, excuse me.
Well, it's
Go right ahead.
only a couple. So, Mr. Agel, the 7-Eleven site, that's as a result of a settlement dealing with properties on 5th and 6th Street that were Craig Jones, JSM. When were they completed? We're talking 17 or so years ago, correct?
My recollection is the bulk of those were 2008, 2009. That whole
I think it was
debacle happened right after the economy tanked, and so it was, most of them were coming online those times.
And is it correct that the applicant owns most of those sites now?
Not that I'm aware of. There were a variety of lenders that were involved, so my understanding is some of them are NMS, but some of them are, there was a large bank involved. Prudential owns several of them. There were some small investors as well.
The essence is that no affordable housing's been created.
So one of the small owners did actually do some on-site designation.
A couple of pieces.
Right.
Right, so also in the parking, you may be the person who knows about this more than others. This is part of this huge land swap around the city to create a fire station. I noticed that it keeps saying in a very bold way, both in this document and the other document, that there is a 6th Street parking easement. What is that?
So the site, there are 2 parking lots that were associated with the Verizon building. So when Verizon sold the commercial condos in the building, they also sold parking lots on 7th and 6th Streets. And then the ultimate owner of those commercial condos placed an easement on the parking lots saying, these parking lots need to serve our tenants. And in order to go forward with the exchange for the fire station and address this, we've got to get that parking removed from those spaces into the new, into these two proposed developments to allow the
And was
that
that
one
easement-
project and the fire station to
Was
go
that
forward.
easement or caveat put on after the deal had been done between the city?
No,
Did
no,
it?
no. When we went through a request for qualifications process, and one of the things that NMS said for the property is that they were going to be selling the commercial condos, and that the owner would have expectations for what that would be. So when we first went to council, we had to go through an appraisal process, and so through that process, we picked up that there were very specific requirements in the in that easement that would have to be addressed.
It is correct to say that this DA really only exists because there is a need for parking.
I'll ask my colleagues in planning, but that's my understanding, is this is about the excess parking.
For the record, they're all nodding. Right? Now, beyond that, there is no other need for a DA here, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
But may I say something? But they're not also in compliance with the city's housing requirements downtown.
No, but they could provide them on site.
They could provide them on site, but that would be a different rent and income structure. Yeah.
Yeah, but the only issue here is the parking.
Okay. Applicant, please. By the way, that quacking you heard meant that 30 minutes have passed. Just so you know, every time you hear that sound, another 30 minutes have passed. My iPhone. Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dave Rand, Armbruster, Goldsmith, and Delvac. Pleased to be back with you tonight on these projects. It's been a while since we floated up to you back in April of last year. Since then, a number of things have happened with regard to these projects and citywide, and we've worked to make some changes, largely in response to the direction that we got from you last year. I want to expand a little bit, though, before we get into that, with our architect, Michael Filonis, on just some of the foundational background events and context that really underlie the project before you tonight and that are critical. But back in 2012, when the city issued a request for proposal, the city essentially said, we need a triple lot to accommodate our new fire station number 1, a contiguous assemblage triple lot. You all know how difficult that is to find, how few of them there are. For background, there's only one of all of the pending projects right now downtown that's a triple lot. The rest are all double lots or single lots. My client was the only respondent to the RFP, and they did that deal with the city, taking one double lot and one single lot in exchange for one triple lot. And when the council directed staff to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement, it was clear that the the site at 7th Street was encumbered by a complicated parking easement that needed to be relocated off-site to ensure contractual compliance and also, frankly, the health and viability of a historic building, the Clock Tower building downtown. With respect to the 711 Colorado deed restriction, I just want to clarify that when the property owner who had that site subject to the affordable deed restriction sued the city, that was not my client. That was an outfit called Dunn Rabana. They sued the city of Santa Monica under the argument that they did not have to comply with that encumbrance. And that was an expensive, difficult litigation for the city that my client was able to broker essentially a settlement agreement. They purchased the site at 711 subject to the deed restriction, and the city was able to settle that lawsuit as a result. Now, what was made clear in the context of that settlement agreement is that this site would serve as the off-site receiver location repository for affordable units subject to the deed restriction AMI for future market rate development deals. That was the benefit of the bargain, and here we are these many years later with the projects actually in front of you. That said, we have tried to be responsive to the DCP and to the city's larger policy goals in terms of what these projects are aiming to achieve. In addition to making the design changes that Michael will talk about, we increased the number of deed-restricted affordable units at 711 Colorado since we saw you last year. We added 10 more units to the project. to ensure that the number of off-site affordable units exceeded the requirement under the DCP. Yes, the rents are different, but the number of restricted affordable units that will be restricted and essentially frozen for 55 years is in excess of what the DCP requires. 25% is what the DCP would have required. 27% is the total aggregate number for these two projects. We have increased the size of the units at 711 Colorado. We heard a clear feedback from you that the SRO unit construct was not welcomed. So the units at 711 now all meet the definition of a dwelling unit under the zoning ordinance. We have stepped up and complied with the higher DCP fees at 90% of the Nexus study. We have heard your understandable and appropriate concern about the tenants of this building at 711 Colorado and the need to ensure that services are provided, because while there are a number of 100% AMI units at those higher rents, there are also 17 30% AMI units, and those people need services. And a representative from Wise and Healthy Aging is here tonight to talk about our partnership with them and the services they will provide to those tenants at that building, and of course the unit that Commissioner Lambert mentioned that will be essentially given to Wise and Healthy Aging to help with their elder abuse program. Also, I think it bears mentioning that this is the first project I've ever been before you that's not maxing out. This project is built to a 3.1 FAR. The DCP allows 3.5. So that's 6,300 square feet of net rentable that we are not achieving. Notwithstanding the fact that we're hitting many of the DCP targets, we are not achieving the full FAR. I just had to say that because I've never said it before. It just felt weird. The project is also LEED Platinum. LEED Platinum, nothing in the DCP requires LEED Platinum for Tier 2. In addition to LEED Platinum, it's all of the laundry list of very rigorous conservation standards, fixture requirements, EV targets, solar panels, the whole deal, as if this was a fully negotiated Tier 3 development agreement. So we have tried to recognize the direction that the city is looking for through the DCP and through our many other projects with you, and do what we can in order to achieve those objectives. And I think, frankly, that at the end of the day, this is a robust package for what are, frankly, below two Tier 2 development agreement projects. So I thank you for hearing us tonight. I'll now turn it over to Michael Falonis from Michael Falonis Architects for a brief architectural overview and a discussion of the design changes that have been made since the 2016 float up. Michael. It's a little weird tonight with this thing. Oh boy, that was not what I was aiming for. Sorry, is this
That's generally what I do.
Yeah. All right, I'm just going to leave.
That's what I was waiting for. I would recommend that.
You can start talking while we're moving.
Can you hit this? This one. Functions. Control. No. Show up?
Oh,
There we go.
How do you do that?
You just gotta hit Control, etc.
Good evening, Commissioners. Michael Falonis Architects. What I thought was important this evening was to go that was not done by our office, nor was it. And okay, what I'd like to do, what we did was to of the building so that you get much more permeable, bulky, and massive image. We moved, as you can see here, the original proposed was the ground floor plan, and one of you at the southwest corner pinches pedestrian circulation. Both the lobby, which is on the lower left-hand side. I don't have anything to point with, so it's a little bit difficult. I hope you can follow along. But the lower left-hand corner, the lobby was there. You can see an elevator there. There was a stair there. And then on the opposite that, on the right-hand side, there was another elevator that came up from the parking garage for the commercial. All of that has been moved to on the right. The renderings on the right, you can begin to see how some of that has changed. In addition, the bicycle parking is now been relocated from the end of the stair that's on the lower left-hand corner, drawing on the left, to the side of the building, and enlarge those from the what we have now units on the ground floor. And if you have those changes, I think they're much more permeable.
While they're sitting down, on the building that's north of your property, you're building right up to
is how they ever got there, because they're on the property line and a street or an alley or something like that. So these were approved illegally.
I see. So basically it's their problem.
Unfortunately, it's it's a sad situation, but we didn't create it.
Okay. Just quickly, I just wanted to say I do miss that irregular plat effect. I thought that was the super cool thing. So, yeah. Anyway, other questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is, how many charging stations do you have?
20%.
20%, and are they distributed evenly on all the floors?
I would assume so. That would be the plan, yeah.
Can I just interject something, Mario? I think the development agreement says that if tenants request it, there will be more than tenants' request will be granted if they want an EV station in their parking space, right? I think that's what the development agreement says.
Does it say that? Well, while you're looking that up, and then okay. So that'll be added, presumably. Then the other question is, what percentage of the energy required for this project is being produced on site? We've had this discussion before.
Yeah, I couldn't answer that this evening. The intent was that the common space would be powered by the PVs on the roof.
Okay. And then the last question was, it seems like you did a pretty good job in responding. The only part that seemed like it wasn't quite working yet was the bicycles, because they're still buried down in the coal mine, way down there, it seems.
Coal mine?
Well, I mean, if you had to bring your bicycle up, you'd be chugging up and up, or you'd have to take it through the elevator.
Yeah, taking it up through the elevator, you won't have to chug much, I guess.
Right, but you know what I'm saying? It's like these elevators and bicycles are going to get beat up a lot. So
I know when I had my office on 4th Street, I used to ride every day until I got pushed off the road, and I stopped, but my bicycle fit pretty nicely on that old elevator on the Central Tower building.
May I?
please.
Just that I had a note about the size of the elevators too. I have also lived in a place where I had to squeeze my bike into the elevator, and we used to bump our bike down 5 flights of stairs on the back wheel rather than try to squeeze it in the elevator, get out. And I noted that you had a commercial elevator, or maybe it was that had the doors on both sides for one floor of bike parking, but it didn't go down below because they were residential floors. Maybe there's a way, I'm not sure if I saw that on this project or the other project. But at any rate, bigger elevators so that people can push their bike through make a huge difference. Those short trips will be by bike and not by car if it's easy to get your bike.
Yeah, I think we can certainly look at that, absolutely. Yeah.
So, sorry, Mario. You can
Okay,
continue.
and then last question is, the Pack Shore elevator, what exactly is that purpose of that? What does it do?
It's to get the people that park in the parking structure their own elevator to get out. It wasn't to be shared with the tenants or the commercial.
So it's for those 20 people who are sharing the
No, it's for the 43 for the 6th Street parking easement.
Right.
So that's for the people in the other building. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I can just address the EV space, so that it didn't sound quite right to me. So it is our standard provision. It is 20% of those whole parking spaces in the project plans have to be EV, and the provision basically is that those spaces must be offered to tenants owning or leasing an electric vehicle on a first come first served basis. And if basically that's the first preference, of those spaces. So it's not just leased out to someone who doesn't own an electric vehicle. There is a provision in here though that based on demand, the planning director, could basically require that the developer install more spaces if we deem that there's demonstrated demand for more of that than what they're putting in the building.
Other questions? I think we're done questioning and we're ready to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Andrew Hoyer and Jerry Rubin.
Good evening. First, I have to say it's a little past my bedtime, so I'll be as concise as I can. I'm Molly Davies. I'm the Vice President of Elder Abuse Prevention and Ombudsman Services at Wise and Healthy Aging. And we are in support of this project as it brings affordable housing for some. And we do have clients on our caseload who this would be affordable to. We don't meet requirements for other standards. So wanted to put that out there as well, and offer any opportunity to ask me any questions if you have any, because we have agreed to provide the social services for the older adult clients at the 711 Colorado property. So we provide an array of services from mental health counseling to case management, nutrition, and several others. So, any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Will you have an office on site for doing your case management work?
So we will have access to the community room.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And the elder shelter will be, if this goes through, one of 2 west of the Mississippi. Wow. One of 2 in the west of the Mississippi. Something that is not available to older adult survivors of abuse. They don't often have access to domestic violence shelters because you have to have the right kind of batterer in order to gain access to those facilities. It would be a small place, but a very amazing start and very generous opportunity for us in this community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
Did I read that your services are available during the day and not at night, or what, did I misread something?
Our services are available during the day.
And so if there were an issue during the evening, are you accessible, or it's just how would the tenants know that there's a different protocol in the evening?
So our services, so we wouldn't be like a building manager or provide that kind of service. We're going to be providing on-site and off-site social services to older adults. And if there are, we have things in place like Life Alert and things like that, if they need more emergency kinds of services in the evening that we can connect them with. But we don't provide like a 24-hour access to those to clients who are part of our general caseload. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David Bruno.
I'm not. I don't know where he is or who he is. However, good evening. My name is Andrew Hoyer, and I'm the Vice President of Santa Monica Mid-City Neighbors. I guess the best thing I can say about it looks like a nice choice to move the outdoor seating to the south side instead of next to the street, but I still think deep-pocketed districts with better ratios of 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. I know they're meeting the requirements. That's all they ever do. 2% more affordable housing. Woohoo! We're really making progress. However, at least in this iteration, we have lost a studio apartment and made the 1-bedroom units a wee bit larger. My last 1-bedroom apartment was 600 square feet. I suppose people who want to live in Santa Monica will be willing to sacrifice 150 square feet just to live here. I'm sure the rates will be affordable and will only go up by 3 to 4% per year, unlike what happens with market rate units everywhere else in this city. I appreciate that this time around we were provided with some shade studies. As for community benefits, perhaps we could start asking the people who want to build these 4 to 7-story structures that will block out the sunlight at ground level to provide us with some community gardens on their roofs. When there are no members of the community at your community meetings, I suppose these are the sort of items that just don't come up. I would be gobsmacked if I ever received an official invitation as an officer of a city-recognized community neighborhood organization to attend one of these. I would even spread the word for them so they could have a decent-sized crowd and get some robust comments from the residents of this city. Perhaps that's exactly what they would like to avoid because, as you know, too many cooks in the kitchen spoil the soup. As of yet, there is nothing on the Planning Department's website for 7-Eleven Colorado. Why is that? With both projects that are being allowed to put their affordable housing off-site and into that project, it would make sense that it be reviewed on the same night as the other two. It has been 1.5 years since these plans were before the Commission, and yet MNS hasn't even pulled any papers for the project. I've listened to the comments, but I still have to ask, how can we be assured that there will be money to build the affordable housing portion of this project? As we all know, NMS is in a court battle that may sink them permanently. Should we require them to purchase a bond so the money is available after NMS is gone? The only problem is we don't know how much that bond should be because we have no idea how much the senior affordable housing project will be. It sounds like sticking around for the next project, but it has essentially the same issues. The only extraneous comment is that the large windows, will they still see sunlight or daytime when the building next door goes up to the maximum allowable height? Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry Rubin.
Thank you very, very much. Jerry Rubin, Santa Monica, Chair Fresco, Commissioners. Well, I think the best thing I can say about this project is that it's fantastic. And people have had an opportunity to participate during the float up last year. I think a lot of us were here. I'm glad it's platinum lead development. After hearing Mr. Rand and Mr. Falonis's talk, it appears to me that they've listened intently to your criticisms and suggestions and did it adequately. The elder abuse issue is going to be a great benefit to the community. We are going to get affordable housing. I wish there could be some more contribution for cultural arts. That always gets the lowest. I'd still like to see that. But I love the design. I like Mr. Falonis, the way he breaks up the buildings. I'm sure most architects would agree with that. It seems like it's a kind of a standard thing in his designs that he's done in some of the buildings, and I think it really is good and very community oriented, and kind of a real neat type of architectural style. So I think this development respects everything. It's not really that large. It's not really that high. And it's going to be a great thing that's going to have opportunity on the ground floor to make it more pedestrian friendly. And in the interest of time, I'm going to end it right there so this can get approved in rapid order.
All right, let's have a discussion now.
I have a couple of questions for the applicant.
Okay, a couple more questions from Amy Anderson.
We all had questions.
Yeah. The applicant gets rebuttal.
Rebuttal.
Rebuttal is, I'll take not terrible from Mr. Hoyer all day long, so we can go into discussion.
So I'm concerned about the amount of parking in the project, and I understand the need to provide the easement, but I guess I'm wondering about carving off the oversupply, let's call it, of parking spaces for the residential units and throwing those into the shared parking category.
So, thank you for the question. I mean, candidly on this, this applicant believes that they need this parking. This project was filed in 2012. We originally designed the parking standards to the zoning ordinance that was going on at the time. That then got changed to the draft DCP, and the parking got tighter. They feel that they're at the minimum amount of parking they need. Frankly, they think they need more parking. The DCP would only require 80 parking spaces, or maximum, excuse me, would be 80 parking spaces for the 6,000 plus square feet of commercial and 64 residential units. They just don't believe that's enough. So we negotiated the 20 shared spaces with staff in an effort to address the concern about parking flexibility, but candidly, just not comfortable reducing the parking below what the numbers are. And frankly, we appreciated staff's recognition of the underwriting that occurred with this project some time ago and how it's really in transition given that the new DCP is in place. Not to belabor it, but look, we know that if we're going to do a new project downtown and you're going to take advantage of that AA streamlined process, you got to step up to the new parking standards, and people are actively trying to figure out how to make that work. But this is a development agreement that's gone on for 5 years. So we feel that the parking is needed and appropriate in recognition of that.
I guess I'm wondering though, if the parking is unbundled, right, and you have control of the shared parking, which I'm assuming wouldn't prohibit you from long-term leasing, or does that prohibit it?
Well, it does, because the reason why shared parking, we view that as a give, is because we can't guarantee that to a tenant, a commercial tenant or a residential tenant for that matter. So it's the exclusivity that is the premium on
the company that's referred to in the DA is whatever it is, 1313.
Right.
Who is the company that the city is dealing with?
Actually both. So WNM Communities, entitlement process.
To own the property. Of course, I'm not arguing that.
Yeah.
Is what remains of what NMS was?
WNMS under new leadership services for all of the
The owner of W. Right.
No, the beneficial owner of WNMS LLC is.
I see. So essentially the person who'll make all the money out of it. So I want to give you the opportunity to deal with this because, as we all know, sometimes newspapers get things wrong. And I've suffered at the hands of newspapers in the past.
It took this long. I'm surprised that we're almost an hour in.
Summer, Mr.
All right, let's do it.
It's summer, and you know you had a good summer, and kids are well, and so on. We had that discussion earlier on. But we're all familiar with the fact that the previous partners of Mr. Schechter described the company as a criminal concern. Why would the City of Santa Monica do a deal that involves him in any way?
Thank you for putting it to me candidly and straight. I appreciate it. Two things. First of all, with respect to the litigation that you've read about in the newspaper, that is a private business dispute. It is not a criminal complaint. It is not a criminal prosecution. It is a civil, ordered a thorough investigation back agreements to be 100% that they have entered into. They have a track. The commission and the council lament the fact that developers come before you and they ask for entitlements and they act as if they're going to stay here and be part of the community and manage their properties, and they sell upon getting that entitlement approved. There is only one multifamily developer that has come through here that gets the entitlements, that builds the project, that manages the units, that oversees them for the life of the building, and that is NMS, now WNMS. So not only do they have a proven track record of living up to their agreements, but they have a proven track record of staying here and overseeing the buildings and becoming part of the community. So I think this is absolutely a developer that merits your trust in entering into an agreement of this kind.
But Mr. Rand, there are some issues. We do have the court case and we do have the decision of the judge, and she was scathing towards the principal, Mr. Schechter, and she made decisions that removed, however temporarily in your view, a considerable control of the company that existed from the then NMS hands and placed it in someone else's hands. That's an ongoing situation. There appear to be considerable difficulties with Mr. Schechter's approach towards with Mr. Schechter's approach towards the court and the resolution of those issues, and that is a significant change to any other time that the city has considered a development agreement. You do refer appropriately to how previous agreements have been run, but this is a new moment. And the question is whether or not, as a city, we should be dealing with Mr. Schechter or entities controlled with Mr. Schechter going forward.
So respectfully, Commissioner, I don't believe it's appropriate for this body or the City Council to act as judge, jury, and executioner in a civil litigation dispute for which you have not done depositions, you have not had evidence before you, you have not listened to testimony, and that case, however damaging the initial judgment may have been, is not over. What the council did in ordering the review, the audit, was for this very discussion, for this very moment, when we inevitably came back with the multiple pending projects and asked to be given an entitlement. And they did that so we could go forward with good projects that stand alone on their merits, and you could have the confidence that they're living up to their agreements. Nothing about Mr. Schechter's private business disputes with a East Coast mega hedge fund that has used unscrupulous tactics on their own. Nothing is relevant to whether or not this project solves the housing problem in the city, delivers affordable units to the city, provides great community benefits, and nothing about that litigation casts aspersions or doubts on whether or not this company can live up to their agreements, because that's been proven time and time again.
And if I may, I believe we should really focus on the findings that are required for the development agreement, and the reality is that council has given direction to move forward in this way, and so now we need to focus on the findings.
City Attorney, thank you so much for that. On the other hand, it does go to whether or not we can find that we should support a development agreement, and this has got to be part of it.
I'm sorry, but we have limited time, and you
Yeah.
can express your points when we make our motion.
I will.
Rather
but-
than continuing.
So, Chair, just let me make this point. The 11 o'clock cut-off is an unreasonable construct. I understand that's what we've got this evening, but to have 2 DAs and be considering it and being told by you we can't, in the fullness of time, assess whether or not the applicant is worth consideration or not, that's not a sensible position. But I'll yield to you at this stage.
We're in agreement that we wish we could go past 11.
We definitely should.
If I may take a moment, what happens if we just can't do 2 DAs tonight?
We can continue to the following hearing. October 18th would be our next meeting, and as long as it's continued to a date certain, that's fine.
Continuance in our future.
I just have a quick point. I mean, it seems to me that a lot of what we're covering now with the first DA would be
Yes.
redundant if we did it again with the second DA.
Yes.
So I think we're going over a lot of the ground.
And we're intending to
with
be
other-
very brief on our side, given all of that.
Okay. So,
But I will finish with the DA's, the City Attorney's point. This goes to whether or not we can make findings about whether or not this is a suitable applicant. That's what makes it reasonable.
Well, the project, though, it's the project with respect to the project versus the applicant.
Well, the applicant is the one who'll build the project. I mean, you're going to sign a contract with somebody.
I understand, but I think it's just, since council has already considered this at a separate agendized meeting on the specific item of the performance of Neil Schechter in particular, it would seem that because it hasn't been agendized that way and because we're focusing on the specific project versus the applicant, that we should just focus on the project and the findings related to the project. Now, if you want to make findings as part of your prerogative to comment on the project in the context of the project and the findings, that's your prerogative to do so. I'm just trying to steer the conversation back to the project.
I have one last question on the parking.
excellent.
So the parking, both this project and the other project, comes. How did the third party get to put the easement over the parking when it existed on 7th Street?
How did they, so they, the clock tower built, not the clock tower, excuse me, the
Verizon.
the telephone building, used those parking lots for their parking. And they,
But you as the landowner must have had to agree to that.
oh yeah, for sure. They absolutely recorded the easement. The easement was essentially negotiated and recorded. And the council knew that in August of 2012 when they directed staff to move forward with the purchase and sale agreement of the 7th Street property for the fire station.
Thank you, Mr. Rand.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
I have a question of staff.
Okay.
Am I correct in thinking that if this were a conforming to the code as opposed as an AA as opposed to a DA, that an off-site affordable housing solution would need to be owned at least in part by a nonprofit?
No, it's not a requirement.
So when I look at 910070, there's language there that relates to it. Why that wouldn't apply? Yeah, and I questioned whether that was correct or not.
Sorry, I'm just refreshing my memory. So yeah, in the project requirements, if it were to be fully conforming to the downtown projects as was adopted by council, the offsite project would need to be owned in whole or part and operated by a nonprofit housing provider for the life of the project.
So it's only because it's a DA that we're looking at a proposal for someone other than a nonprofit to own it. And is there, and there are a number of reasons why we as a community might want a nonprofit managing and owning the affordable units. One of them is that a nonprofit with a a mission that's dedicated to providing affordable housing, that there's a reasonable expectation that the services, the affordable housing services, would continue beyond the affordability covenants. Is that correct?
I mean, yeah, that was certainly some of the thinking, the concepts behind having that language. We do want to clarify regarding the length of the affordability restriction. It is the greater of 55 years or the life of the project. So that's, if it goes beyond 55 years, then it would continue beyond that time frame.
The life of the project, that means they could either tear down the building or...
It's the greater of the two. Greater of 55 years or life of the project.
Just standard.
As long as it's standing and viable.
So I'm saying after 55 years, they could either tear down the building and build new, or they would have to continue it as affordable housing.
Correct.
So, I mean,
so
is
it's a
that,
minimum of 55 years is
right,
basically.
I understand, yeah. And so, I mean, I'm raising the question of, since the baseline here, when we're looking at the code, is that there's a reasonable expectation that the units would be kept as affordable, really in perpetuity. Is that a basis for extending the requirement beyond 55 years? And I wanted to get staff's thought on that.
Basis for, you mean in terms of the services? Is that
services meaning the affordability covenants, the deed restrictions on the affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. So written into the development agreement, if I understand the concern, is that that if you don't have a nonprofit entity, you're concerned that the ability to sustain that project. Am I understanding the question, or?
At the end of 55 years, that they would repurpose it, tear down whatever qualifies as the end of the life of the project, that we would be taking that off the table for some period of time.
Right. And that is something that is that is an option that is available, certainly. But I think until we reach that period, there are provisions written into the development agreement about the requirement for services and certain things that apply to 7-Eleven Colorado. So it would be part of it's very much tied to the development agreement and the market rate projects, and the viability of the agreement, and whether they're in compliance with it.
Can I just?
I'm just thinking very, very long term here, in the hopes that we do have a long term future here. That at the end of 55 years, that we would want, if there's something that we can do now to increase the likelihood that it continues as affordable housing beyond that period of time, seems like there's a basis for that.
Right. I mean, it's theoretically possible to negotiate a longer period, and that would be subject to negotiation. I think 55 years is just the traditional affordable housing, because it's usually the lifespan before you have to invest more money into a project. And so, that's like the typical formula. But there's nothing that would prohibit us from negotiating if the applicant and the city agreed to a longer period. But I think that's the reason why we structured it as the longer of the life of the project or 55 years. So if the project were still viable after 55 years, well, then it would still remain deed restricted. And there wouldn't be like a determinate date or a cutoff date.
I have a quick question. The 7-Eleven Colorado deed restriction goes away when this happens?
Well, this will
It'll take the
basically
place
we'll be
of?
recording a new deed restriction on it, which will. Right, they will be admitting that it would extend whatever provisions are in the new deed would supersede the 7-Eleven deed. They'd have to agree to it, because
my
otherwise.
point is the deed restriction right now in 7-Eleven does not have a term.
I think just for a second we'll verify that.
So if that stayed in place, that would answer your question.
It's 55, yeah.
I thought it didn't have a term.
Yeah, I thought it didn't either. It does.
Oh, okay.
So we actually get something a little longer.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Last question? Discussion?
I also had a question that was similar to one that the one of the members of the public brought up about why 7-Eleven also wasn't brought forward to us at the same time as this.
Well, 7-Eleven Colorado is it would be an administrative approval, is what is structured. That application has not been filed. The plans, however, are attached to the DA to sort of show, what it might look like, but it's not. I mean, this is very similar to 500 Broadway and 1626 Lincoln.
Built says for off requirements, is that correct?
Right, in terms of percentage.
In terms of percentage, okay.
In terms of the affordability mix, it does not, because of the deed restriction, on the 7-Eleven Colorado site. So how we've explained it in the report is that in totality, if you were to look at both projects together, it's 27%.
I thought the city council changed that to 35, which we all were horrified by.
So, no, there's a distinction between projects that were complete before November 2016
Okay,
and
so
those
this
that were
falls
after.
under the old one.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So in terms of the percentage or the number of units, it's consistent, except that the affordability levels are different.
Yes.
The unit sizes are probably different, right? Because we would have gotten some bigger units.
Mhm.
And it's just serving seniors. It's not serving
Correct.
a wider variety of populations.
Right.
Okay. So the settlement agreement says that this needs to be a receiver site. Is there anything that says that we couldn't say increase the affordable housing linkage fee?
No, there's nothing like that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to start the discussion. I have basically 3 things about this project that I would like to see a little different. One is that I would like to have bigger elevators so that bicycles can get easily out of the basement without turning around and driving people nuts, and it's not a huge ask. 2, when we were doing the DCP and we talked about these side elevations and the interest of them, and there's a condition in here about adding interest to the side elevation on the north side adjacent to the lower building, but of course that lower building goes clear to the end of the corner, and I can't think of any place where I could stand where you could see more. I think that's not necessary is basically what I'm getting at, and I wouldn't want them to start making modulations in there and causing more trouble. So I would remove that. And this is a DA. I know that it's a tier 2 project and all that, but most of our projects that are even tier 3 are going to be DRs, and this is a DA, and I would like to see a historic preservation fee added to this of some kind, or a benefit, I should say, for historic preservation like we have done on the DAs that have come in the past. And those are my 3 adjustments to this project. Jason?
Yeah, I'll try to formalize that with a motion to recommend that City Council adopt the proposed DA with the changes that you just outlined, the bigger elevators for bikes, I'll say a housing preservation fee of $75,000, which we've done in the past. I did not. Which page is the section that you want removed?
Oh, that was just a condition. I mentioned in the staff report. I didn't write down.
It's condition 3A. And we wrote that in the spirit of, it's page, exhibit F1, sorry, of the DA. I don't have a page number. We wrote that in the spirit of when we wrote the side elevation provision in the DCP, it was really talking about the exposed wall. That's not covered by a building, so that's what this is intended to address.
I just can't figure out how you could possibly see that wall from any angle, so it
So,
seemed unnecessary. I'd rather get the money for historic preservation into our.
so I'll include that in my motion, and I'm interested in hearing what others think about the, about the project, to include changes in this motion, and in particular, whether we think that in light of the fact that if this was an AA, there would be a nonprofit behind the affordable housing, whether that warrants an extension of the restriction on the provision of the affordable deed restrictions.
Is
I'll
that
second.
a second? Somebody second?
Is the nonprofit part of your motion, or are you asking us?
I'm asking you
Okay.
whether extension of the beyond 55 years, it seems like a worthwhile change.
Did someone second that?
Amy seconded. So.
I have a comment on that. I mean, I would be fine with increasing it beyond 55, but I think that, frankly, that Santa Monica has this love affair with nonprofits that's not entirely grounded. I think that just because something expires at 55 years doesn't mean, number one, this nonprofit's still going to be around, or that the conditions haven't changed and it becomes not affordable. I've spent years working with some of the best affordable housing developers in California, and they're for-profit. And they're long-term owners, and they're very dedicated to their projects. So the distinction between nonprofit and for-profits never meant that much to me.
Amy?
I'm sorry, but I have a question for staff, which is about the shared parking and this idea that I posed to the applicant about peeling off some of the parking spaces that they want to dedicate to residential and throwing those into the shared bucket. Is there anything that would prohibit them from long-term leasing the shared parking? You know what I'm saying? It's like they're public, but they could lease them to a resident who lives down the street, or no?
No, it explicitly prohibits that. It says it must be on a first come first serve basis. They can charge for it. It doesn't have to be free, but it must be first come first serve. Okay. So it doesn't allow that like exclusive leasing to one person or what have you.
So I guess I like the intent of the nonprofit. So maybe thinking about a longer term of affordability. Commissioner Lambert, profit ownership owner, try and set a longer term on this restriction. So I'd be amenable to some longer term. I would also throw out this idea because while we're getting the number of affordable units that is consistent with the DCP, we're not getting the affordability level. Mission to consider, I'd say shared standards.
I think one of the reasons is it's been in the process for 12 years. That they've kind of gone through a lot of design and negotiation and what have you.
And so we'll save them a lot of money. Yeah.
So yeah, those changes are friendly to the maker, including the residential parking, shifting the overage over into the shared category.
Can I just clarify? Does that so 95 spaces? So the 138 spaces in the project, 43 are for the 6th Street easement. So that leaves parking spaces for the 64 the commercial. There are 71 parking spaces. And that's why I wanted to talk through that.
What
because
I'm seeing, the table that Paul showed during is that there are 77 proposed residential parking spaces and the DCP max.
Right. So
48.
that's what they have in the project. That's off the cover sheet. But I'm just breaking it down in terms of like functionality. We sort of did that absent the assignment that's shown on the sheet. So at the end of the day, there's exclusive use of the project. I guess 20 spaces that are
The DCP call for
the project.
So I mean, you're talking about the
So it'd
41
be a 37 space.
Was 37, right?
Yes. Is that right?
Yeah.
Are you looking at?
How much redesign?
Yeah, the parking structure.
It's not so much redesign as a operation
Oh, you're
function
changing it from
management of the
residential to-
spaces.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, okay.
So, Chair,
Yeah.
I'll chip in. So, having given this considerable amount of thought, this is a Tier 2 project in essence, but for a couple of significant departures. One is the parking, and the parking is a major departure from the new standards that we put in place only a couple of months ago. And although the report to us says, well, it was reasonable in the transition, that wasn't the intent of the Planning Commission or of the City Council. It was to change it and put a maximum in place, and so it's a significant departure. And it's a development agreement, so we have an ability to be flexible backwards and forwards with this applicant. And the second thing, of course, is the way in which the affordable housing is moved off-site to a site within the quarter mile that we had put up in the DCP. However, that was an earlier settlement to unsatisfactory resolution of affordable housing in the city of Santa Monica. There's no getting away from it. There are 3 separate bits and pieces of settlement that are at play here. But the parking results from the actions of the owner in accepting the easement over the property to guarantee that he would have rights within the city going forward. And those rights are because the city feels that it has to deal to get the fire station property. There's no getting away from it. Because the city wants the fire station, it's been prepared to accept things it shouldn't have accepted. There should have been eminent domain, and it would have made it easier all round for this city going forward. But because there was a complicated swap, because there is this easement that was put on by the owner of the property, who turns out to be the owner of this property, we are being told, well, you really have to go ahead. And I am the people developing it, and I know that the company has been separated, but I think it's the same separation the President uses when he deals with Trump properties. We all know who controls Trump properties. And I do not accept that that's a reasonable thing, and I do not accept that we should vote for this. And I do believe there are ways of the city to get its fire station project that don't involve signing agreements, both here and in the property on Lincoln going forward. So I will not vote for it, and I suggest that others do not vote for it.
I just have a point of clarification. We took that quarter mile off-site out of the DCP. It's anywhere downtown. In fact, it's anywhere downtown or within a quarter mile of downtown, I think.
Well, that's really what I meant.
Well, I thought you meant that it had to be within a quarter mile of the site.
It's within a quarter mile anyway, but yeah, anywhere downtown or within a quarter.
But that's not an exception. So.
Honestly, I'll just set aside what you had to say.
Well, that's normal.
So,
Accept it.
do we have you want to speak about the parking situation?
No, I don't want to add too much. Actually, my thoughts are more in line with what Commissioner McKinnon has been saying, and I'm inclined not to support the project too. I have different feelings about a nonprofit operator. Adding these parking spaces to me is like a profit play. It takes the ability to have a nonprofit even operating the senior project, and my memory of what this owner-operator has done over the past several years with pony walls and all kinds of other things doesn't match exactly with what the owner's representative spoke about this evening. So I have hesitations, which, for example, makes it difficult for me to make the finding 4, for example. But I mean, there are definitely some things that I like about the project, but overall I feel and I do like the idea, not necessarily in lieu of, and it's good that it is a development agreement, but you know, extending the term to beyond 55 years is important. But for me, it's I don't feel like I can support this project.
No comments. So, are for Jason to speak.
Well, I'll propose as part of the motion just extending it from 55 years, the deed restriction for the affordable housing, to 75 years.
So that means we basically are making 4 changes. That's.
I count 6.
You count 6? Tell
Yeah.
me what your 6 are.
Bigger elevators, removal of that ARB language, housing preservation at $75,000, doubling the affordable housing. What'd I say? Housing. Thank you. Doubling the affordable housing linkage fee, restricted residential and commercial use into the deed restriction for the affordable housing to 75 years. There was one other. Do we feel like we want to make a change to the EV ready percentage? It's currently at
It's in there. Actually, the 20% is in there, and they can ask for more, and it's up to the planning director to say you need to give them more for free.
Okay, so and we're comfortable with that.
Yeah,
okay.
It's already in there.
Commissioner Fresco.
5 to 2. So we have 13 minutes. And
Well, let me ask. Is the cutoff?
It's real.
So I move that we move that project forward to next.
To clarify, that would be
I won't be here. Much to people's delight.
thank you. So anyone want to move to adjourn? That's everything, right?
Your husband just texted.
What?
It's all right. It's not that bad, actually. Yeah, it wasn't too bad.